BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Welcome to the series that captures one extraordinary event in someone's life which transforms everything. This week, the successful businesswoman, the summer wedding, and the shocking moment that ransacked it all. It's 2008, and Emily King is living in Wiltshire with her husband, her horses, and her dogs. She works hard, and so do those horses. They're pulling the carriage that transport newlyweds to wedding receptions. A busy, happy country life then, and she's here to tell us about it. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Just paint a picture of that life for us, because it sounds idyllic.
It was truly charming. I went to agricultural college. I knew that I wanted to work with horses all my life. And I embedded a life of country living. And day by day, we built an incredible business of doing horse and carriages for weddings, proms. And it was just going from strength to strength.
And it sounds as well, if you're doing weddings with a horse and carriage, you are with people at a really important part of their life, a special moment. Can you remember many of those moments?
It was really charming. Being at people's magical days is such a privilege. And the stories that I have are all of joy and magic moments and people's dreams coming true. And we absolutely loved it.
So you've got the newlyweds in the back of the carriage, and there you are at the front with how many horses? Two,
so
four?
We always had a pair, and they were cream with blue eyes and cream manes, so they were very special and well sought after all around the southeast. And then we had two liveried grooms. Livery is the outfits that they wear, the hats and the jackets and the joppers and the boots. And then I had my then husband as the groom next to me on the carriage. There were always four of us out, and we had a support car as well. So we risk assessed everything. We did everything by the book professionally, but we had a lot of fun as well.
I bet you did. There's a lot of cleaning up after horses though.
There is, especially cream ones when they decide to go to the toilet on the way.
En route. Got to manage that though, haven't you, really? It's all part of the fun.
Yes.
So take us now to July 2008, and you've arrived at the reception venue with a bride and groom.
We went to a village not far from where we were living at the time. And as usual, we'd done our risk assessments. We'd done a pre-visit to the venue itself. We'd driven the route, so we knew exactly where we were going and what we were doing, and met the horses' needs by making sure there was somewhere safe for them to tie up. And of course, somewhere for them safe to stand whilst the bride and groom dismounted from the carriage and then continued on into their wedding. And it was a beautiful sunny day. There'd been much jolly talk in the back of the carriage, and I'd wished them well and a happy future, and they'd been really grateful. There were lots of children running around in beautiful bridesmaids' dresses, and the sun was shining, people were holding drinks, and it seemed like any other wedding, chirpy, fun and full of promise for the bride and groom. And at this point, everything really started to change for us. Unbeknown to me, the owners of the venue had two fighting breeds of dog. Fine, dogs turn up all the time at weddings, we're in country villages. And you can normally shout to the owner, could you come and get your dog, please? Or,
The horses presumably are quite used to dogs because you have dogs as well.
Yeah, at that point I had four dogs. I had two very lively collies and two terriers. So you can imagine the morning runs in the field with the horses and country living. They were used to dogs, hounds, you name it.
How quickly did it escalate?
So the dogs then started to get nippy, and when that started to happen, the horses started to become agitated and stamp their feet. And my head groom at that point, my husband, was now trying to get hold of these dogs to pull them away. But the more he pulled them away, the more they had switched into hunting brain, and the more it drove them to want to get to the horses. So at this point, I'm sat on the carriage, staying calm, talking to the horses, using a soothing voice. And there was a moment when it started to really escalate, because one of the dogs then started jumping up just under the neck and the head of the horse, around the jugular area, and the other one went for a front elbow, and the horse actually collapsed to the ground. So they brought the horse down, and the horse that's next to the horse that's being brought down to the ground then does what any animal does that's a fight or flight animal, and that's exactly what a horse is decided they wanted to get out of there. And at that point they both reared up, so they stood on their back legs and they just took off.
Still attached to the carriage?
Yeah, I'm still on the carriage. And next thing I know, we're going at 50 miles an hour, and I pull the rein to turn them round the side of the building, and there's a car park and there's a hedge. They are in full flight and there is no way of stopping them, and they jump the hedge with me on the carriage. Yeah. So they go over it and I go through it.
How terrifying.
And at this point I'm thinking, right, I've got to get control of the situation. This has just happened, but hopefully the dogs are back at the venue and I can control the horses now. So my horses then took flat out gallop, 2 grown horses, down a country lane. So they bolted in horse terms. And I'm up there being thrown around. There's a small ditch either side of the road and hedging, so there's nowhere to go. And I've got no strength left. The adrenaline's gone. The horses have just gone into blind flight. I'm thinking, there's going to be a car coming in a minute around a corner and they're not going to see me. Or one of the horses is going to fall over. I've tried to pull the reins to stop them, but they won't. How I didn't end up being thrown over the front of the carriage in between the horse's legs galloping and the front of the carriage, I don't know. And I looked down, and charging up the side of the carriage are the 2 dogs.
They're still with you. Can you remember, apart from your fear of oncoming traffic, can you remember what was running through your mind at the time?
Absolutely. I gave up. I just had nothing left. There was no exit strategy. There was nothing I could do. It was just exhaustion and dismay, like...
You okay? Do you want to take a moment? That must have been so difficult. Going from that sort of basic, I need to survive instinct to thinking that you don't even have the energy to do that.
You can't function. It's like your brain hits a brick wall. I'd like to say it's an incredible feeling, but it's not. It's a devastating feeling. And there is a moment of absolute hopelessness that time stops.
How did things stop? When did it stop?
So I guess preservation takes over, and rather than fighting, I relaxed, which is a really weird thing to say, but you suddenly become ethereal. You just float in the moment. And the horses carried on running, and I could see the dogs still there, and there was a gateway. And as we went round the bend, I thought, I'm going to try and pull them in here. This is my one hope. I'm either going to die there or I'm going to die in front of a car, and I'd rather die and see my horses smashed up. So I pulled the reins, and I really pulled the reins. We flung into the farmyard, and I took a deep breath because in front of me was a 5-bar gate. How could I go over it? And the horses stopped, thank God. But I got flung and catapulted from what felt like 40 miles an hour, and I landed on the left-hand side on the floor. And all I remember is seeing my horse being attacked again. And one of the dogs went for me as well. And the next thing I remember, weirdly not feeling anything, was the most enormous hands I've ever seen coming down and grabbing the dog off of me and the farmer in the farmyard had heard the kerfuffle, and he was a cattle farmer, so he had bulls. And he just saw what happened and just grabbed this dog off of me and threw it in one of his cow sheds and locked the door, and then grabbed the other one.
It's a brave thing to do, isn't it, with an attacking dog? And you're thinking now?
So after that happened, there was a big surge of cars flying into the yard. So my grooms had jumped in the vehicle, the support vehicle, and followed down the road. I just didn't know which way was up at that point. My brain was all over the place. All I could think about really was, are my horses going to be okay? What's happening? Deep shock. So my functions just slowed right down. I didn't know what I was doing and what I was saying. It's almost like your brain is trying to make you function, but everything's in mud and you're really slow to move and process anything. And actually you're making perfect sense in your head, but you're not making any sense to anyone else.
Yeah, that's because you're in fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah.
You're in shock.
100%. And my grooms and my team were so well trained. They knew exactly what to do to get the horses sorted. And really from there I don't remember. I remember patches of the police coming and the vet coming, but again I don't know how long things took to play out or how long we were there. I just remember saying to people, I'm not going anywhere until I know my horses are okay.
So were you badly injured?
Again, because I'd been thrown from the carriage, I'd not broken anything, but I'd really bruised my back and my head and neck, and I'd taken a concussion. And then I'd been mauled by the dogs, but that thankfully, because I had so much heavy wool on, they hadn't managed to overly break the skin in a lot of places or to create tears. But I did have teeth marks and teeth bruising on me, which was pretty horrible. But I didn't really register any of that until after about 3 days, because I was just unable to think of anything. If anything, I was thinking about how was I going to get to my next wedding the following weekend and what was I going to do, because I was a horse down. And again, it was just that I need to continue and I need to make sure everything's okay. And I'd gone on to autopilot and everyone kept saying, you need to stop. And I was like, no, I can't. How's my carriage? How's my horses?
How were they, by the way, your horses?
Terrified.
And physically, were they okay?
Yeah, no, they had, I can't even remember now. I think one of them had 97 stitches. And the other one less, but...
And you had physical injuries and were numb for a while, working on autopilot. When the autopilot switched off, what sort of psychological impact do you think you experienced?
Everything changed overnight. I couldn't understand how I was going to function. And everyone kept saying, you're going to be okay, we're going to get on with it. And part of me just had stopped working. Part of me disappeared. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't find me. And those people that knew me and knew how vivacious, probably headstrong, committed and in control, just wasn't there anymore.
And that lack of understanding of the change in you, how did that impact your marriage, your business?
I became very isolated. I was running through the motions of what needed to be done every day, because you have animals, so you do. But emotionally, I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't me. And that's the comment I said to everybody, and that nobody really could understand, that I was not me and I was still in my head. I know now it's post-traumatic stress, but then I didn't realise I was reliving that every moment and that fear, and I was terrified of everyone and everything.
So it felt like that event was in the present all the time, felt like you were still living it.
I was living it. I was waiting for everything to go wrong.
Yeah. So isolated and vigilant at the same time.
Isolated, vigilant, like I was walking a tightrope, that everything was an impending doom.
Was it hard for people to reach you? I'm just thinking of your husband.
It was hard. And, looking back retrospectively, I feel sad that he couldn't understand and that I couldn't communicate. It was a constant pressure that just kept mounting. And I didn't know how to stop it. And the people around me didn't know how to comfort me because I couldn't be comforted. And I became very irritable or unpredictable, non-communicative. And in the end, I couldn't find anything to hang on to in my life. And so I left. And thankfully, a friend of mine had a farm and she said, you can come here. So I did. I had 4 horses, the equipment to look after them, and some clothes. No car. I had a bicycle and night terrors and agoraphobia and fear of everyone and everything and loneliness.
How long was it before you knew and received a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder?
It was a long time. It took me going to a solicitor for the case to be seen as a civil case as well as a criminal case for the dogs.
So you were taking action against the venue?
Yeah, and then part of that was that I had to go and see a clinical psychologist, and that's when I got the diagnosis.
So you got some counselling?
I did, but it was exhausting.
Yeah, it's hard work, very hard work when you got a PTSD diagnosis. The civil and criminal court cases went on for a couple of years. What happened at the end of it?
So within those court cases, the civil case was that the dogs had to be removed and one of them was destroyed. And the criminal court case was criminal proceedings, and she was found guilty of negligence of caring for the dogs. And again, part of the order was the same as the civil, that they had to be removed and one of them destroyed.
One positive is that it helped change the law, didn't it? The Dangerous Dogs Act, which was amended in 2014, which talked about dogs being dangerously out of control in any place, that the owner or the person in charge can be guilty of a summary offence.
Yeah, and I think it's a really positive thing that the Act has changed. But animals are vulnerable creatures, and dogs are vulnerable, and they are a product of their environments, and they can't help who they are and their behaviours. It's us being responsible who can help the outcomes. So as an animal lover, it still makes me really sad.
As an animal lover, how did you feel about dogs? Could you go near them?
After the event, I had 4 dogs and I left my life because the 4 dogs were there. I couldn't cope with being around dogs. And when I moved to the farm, I became agoraphobic, and part of that was because I couldn't be out if there were dogs around. It heightened my anxiety massively. And there was one time that I was in Falmouth and I saw one of the same breed that had attacked me, and I passed out. I just floored. I saw it and just went, and they had to call an ambulance. Apparently, now knowing what I know, that's not uncommon, but...
No, you have a very physical response. Yeah.
And even today now, if I see dogs running or running at me, it can make my anxiety quite bad for a day or two. It can trigger.
Tell me how you have managed all this, the anxiety and the fear and the dark places. A friend suggested that you try surfing. Why surfing?
So surfing was suggested because a lot of beaches around the UK don't allow dogs on them during the summer, and I said no originally. But we went down to a beach and I went into the water, feeling completely out of control, like I didn't want to be there, completely alien environment to where I'd been living in the countryside. And I actually felt my shoulders come down for the first time since the accident happened. And I didn't enjoy it, but I do remember a point of thinking, it's okay. Right now, can I go home?
But there was a glimmer of something there, wasn't there?
It was. And when you're so incredibly low, the behavioural cycle is so strong that it's actually unnerving to feel that.
So what did you do with it?
I did it again.
Okay.
I went back out on the water and I'd met a special somebody who is now my husband.
Oh.
And we'd exchanged a wave and he'd asked if I was having a good time, to which I had said, it's all right.
I don't know.
I don't know. And we then carried on communicating. And through that communication, he had been through heart failure twice. So he understood where I was coming from emotionally, being in that sort of lockdown hopelessness and having to make some decisions about changing your life. And we made the decision to start going surfing together. And Al's a really good surfer and he taught me how to surf. And it was a case of finally I can give my trust over to somebody else. I'm not fighting against something. I'm not trying to process something. I'm not trying to sort something else out. And you can hear the sigh in my voice.
The relief. And you meet Alan surfing and you moved to Swansea at some stage.
We did indeed. So Alan had grown up surfing in Gower in Swansea, and it's a beautiful area of natural outstanding beauty, and he took me there. And we used to go down at weekends when we weren't working or when I wasn't hiding away, and we started to build a life there.
And you moved from a surfboard to a paddleboard. Why was that?
Surfing has always been something I've really enjoyed doing and still do now. But as the waves started to get bigger, I wasn't enjoying going head first down bigger waves. And I saw somebody on a stand-up paddleboard and I said, I'd really like to have a go at this. So we got a paddleboard, and back in those days they were all hard boards. They were quite small. They were designed for catching waves. And everybody else jumped on one and fell off, and I jumped on one and stood on one, whether it's because I had good balance from the horse riding. And I loved it. I finally found something that made me feel like me, in between all the other stuff that was going on and the bouts of anxiety, the depression, the night terrors, the inability to control my eating at that point. And it was positive.
It's almost like the first life-changing moment was when you lost yourself, and the second life-changing moment was when you got yourself back.
Well, I'll tell you, Sian, it wasn't just a life-changing moment at that point. 13 years later, I'm British champion. So...
Are you? British paddleboard champion?
Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So absolutely, it didn't just change my life from the negative of going through what I did, but it was a life-changing moment in the fact that it set a course that I then trained every day and took control of my life in terms of my emotional well-being, my physical health. And I used that focus to never be afraid, but to do the best I could every day and become somebody that loved what they did again in their life. And if you'd have asked me a year after my accident, I didn't think I could love anything in life. And that fixed me.
And I bet you've taken that knowledge and invested it somehow. Have you?
So I now run classes both nationally and locally. I've also turned that energy into doing ultra marathons. I've paddleboarded 17 hours non-stop around the Isle of Wight and then jumped on a bike.
Hang on. 17 hours of paddling around the Isle of Wight, which can be a bit choppy.
In the dark, through the Solent.
And then jumping off your paddleboard and getting on a bike.
And then cycling around the Isle of Wight and then jumping off that. I had 4 hours and 8 hours in between. And then running 50 miles across for Youth Trust.
Running 50 miles
50
after all
miles.
that. You are Iron Woman.
Well, do you know, it's funny because people say that, and I love sport, but I'm not competitive. And to me, it's just a case of why not? Because I can. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. I still have the post-traumatic Emily that sits inside of me, and I have had to learn to exist with that person. And I call it my dark passenger. I've given it a name. And the days when that level of fog that comes and sits over me, I imagine it sitting on my shoulder. And I've learned to have tools in my toolkit to pass through that fog, that darkness.
So this might be a difficult question, but thinking back to who you were before that day in July 2008 and seeing where you are now with all that complexity, would you swap back to the old Emily?
If I had to live my life again, would I ever want to go through what I went through? There's a very simple answer to that. I would go through it again.
You would?
Not willingly, but I would suffer what I've suffered because it has made me grow as a human being. I have more empathy. I have, my son calls it superpowers, to be able to achieve the things that I want to in my life and that I'm supposed to achieve. Had I not been through what I've been through, would I have got my son now? Would I be doing the challenges that lay in front of me? Would I be able to reach out and help other people and show them empathy? You know, if there's one thing that I want to come out of all of this is that nobody's ever alone, and there are people that have been going through what you've been going through or similar, and we're in it together this life. Bad things happen to good people, and we've got to look after each other.
It's a very difficult lesson you've had to learn, but the woman who sits in front of me is just glowing with positivity, and I can't wait to go out with you on a paddleboard now.
Anytime.
Emily King, thank you. Now, we know that this might have been quite difficult for some of you. So for details of support with mental health issues, you can go to the BBC Action Line. That's at bbc.co.uk/action line. And if you have a story for us, do get in touch. We're at lifechanging@bbc.co.uk, and you can catch up with all our amazing guests by subscribing to Life Changing on BBC Sounds. Until the next time, goodbye.
Hello, it's Amol.
And I'm Nick, and we're launching the Today podcast from Radio 4.
Come on then, what is it, Nick?
Well, every week we're going to take a big subject we want to spend more time on, because I don't know about you, when I present the Today programme, I'm always thinking of things I wish I'd asked, I wish I'd heard. And this is going to give us the time to do that, to get more analysis, more insight, sometimes more gossip.
Same goes for me. I'm looking forward to this. Episodes will drop every Thursday. It's called the Today podcast, and you can listen now on BBC Sounds.